This is the Hall Institute of Public Policy's Forum, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to welcome you back. My name is Michael Riccards, and today our guest is a well-known reporter in the state of New Jersey, Dunstan McNichol. Dusty, welcome. We're glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me over.
One of the areas that you've examined more than just about anybody is the state of pensions in New Jersey. Give us an idea of what is happening and what the history has been.
I think the idea of what is happening is you take a look at, and you want to run for cover, because they had a meeting in Trenton yesterday, Thursday, where the directors of the pension fund reported that so far this year they've lost $23 billion out of a fund that started the year worth $81 billion. So now it's worth $61 billion, and to put that in perspective, it still sounds like a big number, but the benefits it's scheduled to pay out over the next 35 years or so total $118 billion. So there's a gap to be made up. They have less than half what they need. An actuary would tell you you really need to have 80% of that amount in hand if you're going to count on investments and growth and over time to make up the difference. So they're in a box here that is a box pretty much of their own creating, and that it left them uniquely unprepared for the current financial crisis that's just driven everybody's long-term planning right off a cliff.
Is their yield a lot less than what's happening on Wall Street right about now?
No, their yield isn't a lot less. What's a lot less is, I'll keep putting this back into the terms of a 401k, because I think most people are familiar with your personal retirement account, that hopefully each week as you get paid, you're putting a little bit into that, and as long as you're putting some money in, even as the stock market drops off to the tune of 23%, which it has this year, you'll see it go down, but there's a cushion in there that you've supplied by continuing to put money in. The state has not supplied that cushion, and the state has allowed local governments, who are also participants in the pension system, to also not supply that cushion. So for about 7 years, the only people putting money into the pension account were the employees of the state, the beneficiaries of the account. The employers didn't put in the amounts they were required. Over about the last decade, they've skipped somewhere on the order of $7 billion in contributions that they should have made. That just takes away another layer of protection for their long-term needs. And so when they hit a year like this, which is really totally unprecedented in everybody's recollections, they're just not, they don't have the wherewithal to confront it.
Now, the localities, the school boards, they're all creatures of the state legislature. They're all,
yes,
they're all creatures of the state. There's no independent authorities there. Why did the state allow itself and its creatures to stop contributing to a pension system that they knew really represented a series of obligations?
The worst thing about the pension fund is that it's a very current expense to make your annual payment into the fund, and the people making that payment, the elected officials making that payment, don't see the benefit. The benefit arrives 30 years down the road when there's enough money in the fund to continue paying benefits without raising taxes. In the short term, if you're an elected official and you're looking at in the case, I'll give this year's example of the local governments that are part of the system, the town municipal governments who pay into one retirement account for traditional government employees and a separate retirement account for police and fire. The total bill that they were supposed to put in this year was $1.1 billion. So across across the state, you have mayors making their budgets and looking at their piece of this $1.1 billion and saying, this is going to cost me a lot. This is becoming a large part of my budget. So, and there's no gain to them. So yesterday, the governor said that as a form of short-term tax relief, he's going to ask the legislature to pass a bill that would authorize the towns to not make half of that $1.1 billion. They would be able to postpone depositing $541 million. I mean, that works out to $1 million a town. It's not spread evenly, but in a town budget, it's a number you see. And and so they're happily embracing this. The mayors are all excited about it, but the problem is that it's not a bill that's going away. And the mechanics of how the pension fund works just make what the governor has proposed essentially the equivalent of giving the towns $541 million today by taking out a 30-year loan. And it's going to have to be repaid over the course of the next 30 years. Now, the state handles its 30-year debt a little differently, and we can get into that now, or we can get into that later because it takes a little while to explain the mechanics. But the essential problem, and the reason the pension fund is in dire straits now, is because back in the early 1990s, when the economy was doing very well and tax revenues were doing very well, the pension funds were doing very well, and the decisions were made, among them cutting the state income tax that Governor Whitman did when she was in power. They cut the state income tax, and in order to find some savings in the state budget to offset the lost revenue from that, they went to the pension fund and they said, look, we're scheduled to put in $400 million this year. If we don't put that in, that's $400 million that essentially is paying for our income tax cut. And that was really the first time that the pension system and the fund had become integrated with the state budget. And it started what has turned out to be a really bad strategy and common policy of sort of sideways glancing, including the money in the pension fund as an asset to be used in the state budget.
Why don't we stop? We'll come back to that. It's a really important issue in a moment. Thank you very much.